What's going on, everyone? Welcome into another edition of the 415ers podcast. As always, on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network, you can download, rate, subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Go check it out on the Odyssey app. It is Marc, Grandi. It is Evan Giddings. We got some quarterback comments that were made earlier this week. We got some quarterback comments that were made just after we finished recording our episode from last week. But of course, we're coming at you twice a week here in the off season. We also have some comments from the GM, John Lynch himself, referring to the NFL draft. But before we get into all of that, Marc, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Evan. Yeah, we've had some gloomy weather in San Francisco in the 415 recently. A little bit of rain the last couple of days. Supposed to get warm again. I'm looking forward to that as we're now into May, getting towards summer. I'm looking forward to that and the warm weather. And then, of course, we got football because you see players out there practicing and OTAs and all that. So I'm looking forward to the warm weather. I'm looking forward to summer. That leads into the fall. It's going to be a lot of fun, but overall, I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Nothing to complain about. I'm looking forward later on in the week to the official schedule being released. And so, for those of you wondering about that, we're going to be recording after the schedule is released so we can break it all down for you. So, expect an episode on Friday instead of the usual Tuesday, Thursday schedule. So, I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to getting into some comments from earlier today as we're recording this on Monday, because on ESPN's Get Up, and I believe also on NFL Live, Dan Orlovsky, well-known media, very smart, very intelligent former quarterback in the NFL, had a couple of interesting comments specific to Sam Darnold, and essentially mentioned the fact that Sam Darnold is capable, quote, of taking this team back to the NFC Championship game, referring to the 49ers. He's excited to watch him if he's the guy in San Francisco, with Brock Purdy being a little banged up right now. So, of course, this is all contingent upon Brock Purdy not being available or earlier in the season. But I don't know if this necessarily came out of nowhere. I know there's some comments from last week that we'll get into a little bit later on, Marc. But were you surprised to hear Dan Orlovsky on ESPN earlier on Monday refer to Sam Darnold as not only just a potential QB1, but a guy that can get them back to where they were last year in the Final Four?
So, okay, I think in a vacuum, this comment doesn't really mean all that much. Him saying, Sam Darnold can lead the 49ers back to the NFC Championship game, I mean, maybe I'm just playing semantics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he thinks Sam Darnold is going to be the team starter or is going to eventually become the starter or is going to prove himself better than Brock Purdy or better than Trey Lance or whatever. Just at its base value, it means that Dan Orlovsky thinks Sam Darnold is good enough to help get the 49ers to the NFC Championship game. I do take a little bit of offense is the wrong word. I don't agree with him using the word lead. And it's something we talked about a lot with Jimmy Garoppolo in his career with the 49ers. The conversation is always, have the 49ers won because of Jimmy Garoppolo, or do they win in spite of Jimmy Garoppolo, or do they win with Jimmy Garoppolo, but not necessarily because of Jimmy Garoppolo? Like, this 49er roster, Evan, is so dang good that there are at least a handful, more than a handful. There are double-digit quarterbacks in this league that could lead the 49ers to the NFC Championship game. I don't think that's a hot take at all. Like, they have a very complete roster. Is Sam Darnold one of those guys? I don't know. Maybe if things break the right way, then sure. I guess I could maybe see that happening. But where I disagree strongly is Sam Darnold ain't leading you to anything. Like, he's not going to be the reason why you're winning playoff games unless you just see a complete career renaissance and he looks nothing like he has been throughout the rest of his career. So, long story short, I don't think it means all that much. It doesn't mean that, Dan Orlovsky thinks Sam Darnold is the Niners' best quarterback on the roster. I think it's more so a comment about the status of the 49ers roster, which boasts so many star players on both sides of the football, that even someone of Sam Darnold's caliber, who hasn't really achieved that much in this league, has a pretty decent chance to win a playoff game or two.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do think it is in reverence to the coaching staff as well as the roster itself. I think Kyle Shanahan has gained and already had a lot of respect in the league, but even more so with what he was able to accomplish with the quarterback room and revolving door that he had last year. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Dan Orlovsky thinks that he could lead the 49ers to an NFC title game the way that this team is shaped, how good the defense is, how good the weapons are. Um, but I'll say this, and before we get into the Trey Lance component of this, because I have not heard many comments along these lines from national, local media members, folks who follow the 49ers. Before we get into that, is this disrespectful to Brock Purdy? Because if you're saying, and I understand where Kyle Shanahan, look, you're not going to bring in a quarterback that you wouldn't think that could, especially with the way that last year played out. You're not going to bring in a guy that couldn't potentially step in and help this team get to where it was last year. But what Brock Purdy did was historic. I understand he's Mr. Irrelevant and all the rest, but once he was thrust into relevancy, he was pretty dominant under center. So Dan Orlovsky, when I hear these comments, I'm thinking, okay, well, is Sam Darnold just as good as Brock Purdy then? Because Brock Purdy played at a level that no rookie, that no person in his position has ever played at before.
Yeah.
To me, comes off as a little disrespectful to the guy that he would be taking the job from due to injury.
I think you're onto something there. I think what happened when Brock Purdy had all that success and, didn't lose a regular season start and won his first 2 postseason starts. I think what happened is it kind of opened the door for everyone, for media members, for fans, hell, even maybe for players as well, to believe, well, this guy did it, anyone can do it. Like, and I know it's maybe a little bit different for you and I, for, other media members here in the Bay Area, for Niner fans who watch every waking second of this team and are consumed 24/7 by this team. It's a little different for national media members or fans just of football in general who aren't so consumed by 49ers football specifically. I think there's a little bit of, yeah, Brock Purdy was good last year, but look at the roster. I mean, if Purdy could do it, I think Sam Darnold could probably do it. But I think the reality, Evan, and you and I know this, I think the vast majority of our listeners know this, and most people out here know this, Brock Purdy was really freaking good last year. And it's not just as simple as saying anyone could go and do that. So I think there's a bit of a disconnect between the level of respect that Brock Purdy gets based on how often you watched him. And I also think there's a little bit of disrespect that gets thrown to Jimmy Garoppolo after the fact as Brock Purdy has all this success. Because, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, got the Niners to a Super Bowl and an NFC Championship game, but in his rookie year, Mr. Irrelevant also goes to an NFC Championship game. Jimmy, you should be doing more. This rookie made you look, like a rookie, essentially. Like you were as good as a rookie. So I think what Brock Purdy did ultimately pushes a lot of disrespect almost in different angles. And in this case, you're right. It almost kind of deflects back on himself because I'm not sure everyone out there fully realizes just how good he was. And I'm not saying that he was the number one reason why the 49ers made the NFC Championship game. Of course, they had a fantastic roster, and the acquisition of McCaffrey was great, and that coincided with the winning streak. But you also saw the difference when Josh Johnson was in there at quarterback, and it was ugly. And again, I mean, that's a off the street pickup once, Jimmy Garoppolo went down midway through the season. But I do think you're right. I think this is a little bit of a slight towards Brock Purdy, and it's just the nature of what happens when what he did last year happens, because you don't expect it. It's a 7th round rookie. He does well. The natural assumption is, well, if he can do it, anyone can do it. But the reality is that's not the case.
Well, and it's just interesting to me because Dan Orlovsky, I believe, was really at the head of a discussion and breakdown about how good Brock Purdy was and the decision making that was beyond his years in the first couple of weeks that Purdy was thrust into action. So it's surprising to hear for me to hear Orlovsky then talk about a quarterback that quite frankly, tape is not as good as Brock Purdy was, even though he played some good football down the stretch of last season. And I think your original point of a compliment to the as well as the coaching staff is probably where that comes from. But look. I can only judge from Purdy and Garoppolo. It's kind of I think once McCaffrey came in, it was a completely different offense,
Yeah.
and so it's hard for me to judge the offense based on the one game and a monsoon and a quarter that Trey Lance played with that team. But I know that the numbers were pretty similar from Purdy to Jimmy G or vice versa. But if you watched, and that's really all we can do, and I'm not saying that we have any more intimate knowledge. We do this podcast and we've had a chance to cover a couple of games and go to a couple of practices, but we're not in the locker room every single day. Neither obviously is Dan Orlovsky. So we're judging things largely from the same prism. And it was completely different from Garoppolo to Purdy. Anyone with two eyes can see that. And so I just think it's interesting how I'm not saying he's backpedaling, but how the narrative has quickly changed. And maybe he doesn't believe that Purdy's injury is something that's going to be just ready to roll in week 1 or even in week 4. So I don't really know where it's coming from. And it's hard for me, Mark, to kind of wrestle with the why.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of noise out there. I know we're going to get to another piece of noise here in just a little bit, but there's a lot of noise, Evan, around Sam Darnold. I mean, the Niners obviously brought him in for a reason. He's been around, but he's still on the younger side. There's a lot of belief that he can continue to develop. This is the best situation he's ever been in. There's clearly a lot of confidence around him, and you're right. You really don't hear much talk about Brock Purdy. I mean, of course, the reason why is he's injured, and once he gets healthy, then that will change. But I mean, even the other side of this, Evan, is Trey Lance. I don't remember the last time I heard someone with the respect of Dan Orlovsky, with similar stature of Dan Orlovsky, say something like this about Trey Lance. The last time we probably heard it was maybe a little less than a year ago, before he started in the regular season in that monsoon game in Chicago. After that, Evan, really everything about Trey Lance has been, I'm not so sure he can do it. Or based on how the 49ers have talked about him, it seems like Kyle Shanahan doesn't like this kid and he's made up his mind and is ready to move on. Like, that's how this conversation has evolved. And you hear these things about Sam Darnold while you hear almost nothing about Trey Lance. You hear almost nothing about Brock Purdy. I'm with you. It begs the question, why? What's going on? What do the 49ers actually believe? Is the outside noise at all similar, or does that, I don't know, mirror how the 49ers feel inside their facilities? I don't know. I guess we'll find out when we get closer to the season and into off-season training camp and such. But it is interesting that all the talk around the 49ers quarterback room seems to be around Sam Darnold.
Yeah, and look, if the conversation is if Brock can do it, Sam can do it, or I should say, if the roster is set and the roster is as dominant as it looks, then Sam should be able to do it. Then my natural rebuttal would be, well, then why can't Trey do it? And maybe there's some very real reasons as to why. I'm sure there are, and we're going to get into in just a moment. But um, that's the first place my mind goes, because like I'm not going to sit here and tell you I think Trey Lance is going to be, Drew Brees or anything, but I also just wonder if Sam Darnold is collecting all this confidence and talent, or confidence and buy-in from both the local and national side. Um, simply put, why hasn't Trey? So that's something that we can definitely keep an eye on.